Well, first of all, pal, great seeing you, man. How's everything?
Great to see you, Dave. I think back to the first time that I met you, and it was 1999. That means 25 years of friendship. Not to make you feel old, but that's a legitimate number in our relationship.
And actually, that was the first time we met in person, but you and I had chatted on the phone
Yes.
in 1994 because I was looking for some advice, and you've always been gracious. I feel weird saying that you're one of my mentors because we're close in age, but back then,
Yeah.
25, 30 years ago, it felt like you were so much older than me.
You know what's so funny too? Because you obviously have no control over who comes into school when you're still there or when you start, someone graduates. That's exactly what happened with the two of us. You started the year that I graduated. So we never crossed over in Syracuse, but I actually skipped a grade. I'm going to give you a full butterfly effect. I skipped third grade. So if I didn't skip third grade, you and I would have known each other back in the 90s, early 90s, and maybe our lives are completely different. So I can't even wrap my brain around it, man. I just freaked myself out.
Did you skip third grade because, other than you being incredibly intelligent,
Yes.
and you really
Yes.
did need elementary school?
It
Was
was
it?
kind of a reverse Billy Madison. They were just so blown away by my intellect. No, we had moved from one area of Queens, Rego Park, to another area, Forest Hills. So I was changing schools. And, this is how different it was in the New York City school system in the 1970s. My dad and I went into the new school and we were told to bring my work from the previous school. So we brought my work and we met with Dr. Charles Bechtold, the principal, a very lanky gentleman with glasses. And he looked at my work, he looked at me, he looked at my dad, and then he turned to my dad and said, well, he's done all of the third grade work. Does he want to be in fourth grade? And my dad turned to me and he said, Ian, you want to be in fourth grade? I said, yeah, that's fine. And that was it. That was the whole transaction. I was in fourth grade. I got moved up a grade, and your whole life changes over one 20-second interaction at PS 101 in Forest Hills, New York. It's nuts.
I thought that maybe it was because you were on the road with your folks because your mom was a singer and your dad was a comedian.
Right.
You were living in the nightclub, so I thought maybe you weren't even in
Nope.
school. I wasn't even sure that you were in school at any point.
I was living off the land, Dave. Just very different upbringing. No, I actually lived in an apartment, and then we moved to a home. And because of that, and also because now school was starting to get serious, I was not on the road nearly as much. So prior to that, the school that I had been going to, they were very free and easy with my attendance. And now that we moved to a different area and I was going to attend public school, they were not going to give me the same latitude. So I had to really buckle down and focus on my schoolwork in fourth grade. This was a priority.
Well, I was free and easy with my attendance at Syracuse. Tells you how much I went to class. But for
Yeah,
guys
you
like
didn't
us,
mention that, by the way, in our first conversation. And you never said, like, hey, by the way, I didn't go to any classes over my 4 years. You didn't lead with that.
I mean, for guys like us, we didn't need to, in a way.
No.
We needed to graduate. It was a necessary evil, but no one in our profession it was ever going to ask for a resume
Yep.
or ask what our GPA was. It's very weird, right? Other than professional athletes, our interviews were going to be based on
Yep.
our voice and our faces, which it's amazing with our faces that we both have gotten to where we
Yeah.
are.
I kind of realize you led with voice, not face, on this particular exchange. You're so right. Nobody really tells you that at that point. So I did feel some level of stress to perform in the classroom just to validate my dad paying all this money, and not even pressure from him, probably self-imposed more than anything else, or a sense of pride. I did not do that freshman year. Freshman year was a complete wash, to the point where I had to intercept the letter that was sent to my home that I was on academic probation after freshman year. My father never saw the letter. So in my mind, it never really happened. And then first semester sophomore year, I actually got serious about schoolwork. I had to take 21 credits in order to catch up, which I did, and then backed it up with an 18 credit second semester. And then I was back on track. All the numbers were fine after that. But you're right. Nobody ever asked me in any of these interviews that I've done with teams or networks, hey, what'd you get sophomore year sociology? It's never come up.
I do want to get into actual like NFL and Cardinal stuff, but I do feel like the nerdy broadcasting stuff is interesting to some people, maybe
Yes,
not
finite
as much.
audience.
I
Yeah.
mean, just because it is such a strange field. I remember when I got to Syracuse, you were already a legend. And I'm not just saying this because you're on the Zoom with me, but I just remember everybody saying, and Tirico was local at that
Yeah.
point. My freshman year, he was doing local TV in Syracuse, and everybody kind of knew that he was ascending. Sean
Yep.
McDonough was already doing the World Series at this point, so Sean was the standard, still is, in my book in terms of play by play. And people were talking about like, oh, Iron Eagle, this guy Iron Eagle. I'm like, what's an Iron Eagle? Like, I didn't grow up in New York. You were, a New York guy. You're working at the Fan right out of college, and then you got the Nets job, right? And then the
Yeah.
Jets shortly thereafter, which then
Yes.
turned into Nets TV, CBS TV, and other stuff. And here we are.
Yeah, what's pretty wild to think about that time. Met Mike Tirico on the sideline of a high school football game in 1987 in Homer, New York. So just the happenstance of life. I was covering it for Z89. He was there for WTVH. He had just started as the weekend sports anchor. He was a senior in college, and he got the job as the weekend sports anchor at the CBS affiliate. That's how talented he was and how coveted he was. So I went up, I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, "Oh, I'm from Queens." He said, "What part?" "Forest Hill." I said, "I'm from Bayside." And that's it. We were off and running. This is now a friend for life based on me going up to him on a football sideline of a high school random game on a Friday night. I end up becoming his intern. I end up becoming his producer. I end up producing a sports show for him on the radio outside of his TV duties on a commercial radio station. When he can't make it, he has me host the show my senior year. These are all experiences that I look back on now and I realize they played a large role in developing a style, developing a confidence, and then just the osmosis of being around him for 3 years. I didn't think when I drove off from Homer, New York, that dude one day is going to host the Olympics and be the voice of Sunday Night Football. I just knew he was really talented. And I actually do remember him filling out his ESPN paperwork when he was applying for the job. I was in the office that day producing his sportscast, and I thought to myself, well, he's going to get that job, and we're not going to see him again here in the Syracuse area. That's what happened. Sean McDonough spoke at Syracuse my senior year, blown away by him, blown away by his presence, blown away by his vocabulary, blown away by his confidence level. And it was very motivating. And I think I speak for you when you walked into the radio station at WAER with those pictures on the wall, you thought to yourself, I'd love to be there one day. This is something to aspire to. It was Marv and it was Marty Glickman and it was Dick Stockton and Andy Musser and Hank Greenwald and Len Berman and Bob Costas and on and on and on. And I think anyone that worked there felt some sense and connection to the past. And it's been nice to see that paid forward. And the fact that you and I did speak when you were coming out of college, the fact that you had a place to get some feedback or even just toss some things out there to see if you were warm in what you were thinking and what your philosophy was going to be moving forward and trying to get a job or weighing opportunities. And that I had been through something over the 4 years from your freshman year to your senior year to give you a little bit of insight those little moments really do help, certainly in our business and in life in general.
When we left Syracuse, all of us left with a dream,
Yep.
thinking maybe possibly we'll get a job,
Yep.
make $10 or $12,000 a year, get a chance to do play-by-play for high school football or something like that. Um, and some of us did better, some of us didn't make it, but we didn't know. None of us had any idea when we
No.
left. But we all went to Syracuse because we wanted to be that guy. When did that dream start to form for you? Because obviously you grew up in a home full of entertainers. So
Yep.
was it early on? When did you go the route? Because obviously you're incredibly funny and entertaining, but yet you're as solid as they come with play by play. So you mix it very well. That's why you're doing what
Thanks.
you're doing. And you don't need me to tell you that. But
I appreciate it though.
when did that, when did you say, you know what, I'm going to not go down the same road my parents would. I'm going to go into sports broadcasting, but I can also kind of weave in the entertainment side of it.
I was 8, and that's not an exaggeration. I remember very vividly the year and the experiences of my life that led me to think that this is something that I wanted to pursue. I was so into local sports, New York sports, and then whatever I could get on the network level, Game of the Week on NBC, Wide World of Sports on ABC, NFL on CBS, you name it, I consumed it. And I told my dad first that I wanted to do this one day. And he said, well, then that's what you'll do. And when you're 8 years old and your dad tells you that you can do it, you believe it. I separately told my mom, and my mom actually was a bigger sports fan than my dad was at that stage. My dad got into it more as I got into it more. But at that point of life, she had a bit more knowledge and a bit more interest. And she told me the same thing. She said, oh, well, great. Then that's what you'll do one day. And that was pretty much a wake up call for me of, oh, my parents believe in me. So I should probably just believe in myself. And I did. And I didn't do a whole lot about it. Different time. You didn't have outlets in which to do it. I was calling play by play on my bed using baseball cards. I was doing play by play if we played pickup basketball. But I wasn't the kid that was then trying to figure out a way to do it in middle school or high school. I just knew in the back of my mind that I would one day do it. All my friends knew that I wanted to one day do it. So when I started applying to colleges, and Sports Illustrated had done an article mostly about Greg Papa, who had just graduated. And Greg got a job doing the Indiana Pacers, eventually went out west to do the Golden State Warriors, now the voice of the San Francisco 49ers. Excellent play-by-play guy. And there was a picture of him, and it listed all of the play-by-play announcers that had been through Syracuse and Newhouse. And the title of the story was The Cradle of Sportscasting. And it really resonated with me. I read Sports Illustrated every single word. I would read the publisher and everybody that was on the staff. I was that interested. And that was the moment that I decided that Syracuse is where I wanted to attend. And I made it my business to get as much information as possible, apply, did an interview in New York City at Lubin House, which is an extension of the university, got into Newhouse and went there and hit the ground running. I was very much ready for this, wanting to do it, and always viewed it as very realistic. I had zero backup plan. I just locked in on the fact that I was going to do this. And everything you said, I felt the same way, which was, I don't care where it is in the country. I don't care how much money I get paid. I don't care what the responsibilities are. I just want to go out there and do this on the air in some form and make a living at it, and I'll be happy. That's how I viewed it.
So this was probably 8 or 9 years ago. I was at Syracuse back doing a college basketball game, and the Newhouse School had asked me to speak to the
Yep.
students. So I'd spoken to the students, and my eyes don't work as well as they used to. So I'm seeing this person start walking towards me, this young man. I'm like, what's Ian doing here? And this person puts out his hand and says, hey, I'm Noah Eagle. I'm Ian's son.
Oof.
And Noah and I talked for a little bit. And again, I'm like, it took me a second. So I'm like, wait, it's Ian, but it's a younger Ian.
Yeah, a little
No.
better looking, better shape, a little more cut, little bit more yoked. I am.
And then I used to joke with Noah when I would see him on NBA games when
Yeah.
he's doing Clippers, like, "Hey, don't take our jobs." Well, now he's taking all of our jobs. The guy's and he's so good,
Oh,
and
thank you, Dave.
he's such a great guy. You guys, you and your wife did such a tremendous job raising him. So when did you think Noah wanted to do this?
Mm,
Because you're this is a compliment to both of you. You sound alike yet different. His way of calling a game is similar to you, yet I know it's him, not you,
yep,
when I listen. When did you know that this is what he wanted to do? Because my son just left to go to college to be a film director. He's an NBA fan and a sports fan,
amazing.
doesn't want to get into broadcasting, and I never really pushed.
Yeah.
Did you push at all? Did Noah come to you early and say, Dad, I want to do this? How did that all come together?
No, I did not push, and appreciate all your kind words. And Noah has the same love for you. You uh, obviously stood out in his travels because he would reach out to me every time he saw you to say, "Oh, I got to catch up with Dave. He's the best." And I'm like, "He's okay." No, I confirmed it. So I'd say around 13, 14 was the first time he ever verbalized it to me or to my wife, Elisa, that it might be something he was interested in. Prior to that, never brought it up, but he always observed with a keen eye. Anytime I brought him to an event, I would notice him paying attention to details. And then the things that he would parrot back to me in the car back home would not be the obvious stuff. It would be secondary, ancillary aspects to the experience that made me think, okay, this kid's paying attention. He's taking it in a manner that is not the normal back and forth that you might have with your kid who just attended a football game or an NBA game or a college game. It was very detailed in his questions in regards to aspects of it that I didn't even think he would be interested in. So fast forward when he's trying to figure out a school, he went on one trip to Syracuse. My wife took him, and it was not a great experience. They didn't get the best tour guide. He didn't have a great vibe about the school. And my wife called me. I was on the road and said, no, I do not think Syracuse is in Noah's future. And I thought, that's fine. He's got to make his own decision. He's got to figure out what feels right. And he ended up visiting a bunch of other schools. And I think my wife convinced him, hey, give it one more shot. Let's go back up and maybe you'll have a different experience. Maybe you'll feel the same way. He went back up, completely different experience, and felt something on the way back, on the ride back, and said to my wife, I think I want to go there. And at that point, that's a difficult decision for the son of someone that went there, both parents, and then wants to go into the same business as his dad. You could easily say, let me take a different route. Let me go somewhere far away. He had applied to USC and UCLA. Those were two legitimate options for him. And he chose that path. And that said a lot to me, even at that stage of, okay, he understands what he's getting himself into. Even with all that said, and he was a bright kid, did very well in school. He could connect with adults very easily, so could hold his own in conversations. Anytime he had to be front and center, whether it was plays or a show at school, always knocked it out of the park. But you and I both know you have no idea when someone puts the headset on how that is going to come across. So as we're driving away and getting on Route 81 to leave Syracuse after dropping him off for freshman year. He's in Brewster Bolin as his freshman dorm. And Elisa turns to me and says, we've now shed some tears and we've had the hugs and all of it. She says, is he going to be any good at this? And I turned to her and said, I have no idea. I don't know. And I really didn't. You don't know. It turned out that he did have an aptitude for it. He had a great ear. He developed his voice over 4 years. He developed his play-by-play and his style. And yes, there are certain aspects to what he does that sound similar to what I do, but he has made it his own and he's done it his way. And it's been nothing but pride and joy that he's doing something that he really enjoys. That's all we root for our kids. Be happy. Be a happy person. Get up every day and get excited about whatever it is that you're going to do.
Well, he's terrific on air, even better human being.
Thanks,
And
Dave.
it's so cool to see, because he's like you in that you're for others. You've
Yep.
always been giving. And my interactions with him, he's always asking questions about
Yep.
business and family. And I can see why, like watching the Olympics, him and Dwayne Wade, or watching him with Todd
Yep.
Blackledge, you can just tell he's so easy to get along with. It's not
Yep.
easy. I mean, Todd's been in this business a long time. Dwayne
Yep.
Wade is an international star. Everybody knows who Dwayne Wade is. Like, those relationships aren't easy to build. You have worked with, people that are in the Hall of Fame,
Yes.
uh, international celebrities. Like, those relationships aren't easy. You've got to earn their trust, and he's done a great job of that.
Yeah. And Dave, you're in a very similar boat in that you have worked with a bunch of different partners on a variety of assignments, and there's no handbook. No one says this is how you do it. It's based on you. It's based on what you're willing to put into it. It's based on being a good teammate. And then the very simple way that I would lay it out, and I do think Noah learned this from watching me, and I learned it from watching my dad. And that is, when you enter a room or a situation, you can change the molecules in the space. It's based on you. So it could be heavy duty negative, and you walk in and you can make it positive. And by the way, you can reverse that. It can be a upbeat situation, and then your presence brings it down. So if you're aware of that, it's no different in a partnership on TV and radio. If you're willing to go to the right places with your partner and do it collectively, cohesively, collaboratively, then there is a feeling of community. And after the game is over, you can take the headset off, you can look at one another and truly feel like, hey, we did something really well together. It's not about you, it's not about them. It's about both, the partnership. And I find that to be the biggest key in how I've tried to approach this job throughout my career, whether it was games or radio shows or pre and post game shows or doing a speaking event, and that incorporates somebody else. You just have to be aware, have a high emotional IQ about the situation that you're walking into.
You just mentioned taking the headset off after a broadcast and feeling like you nailed the right moments,
Yeah.
and that you all feel good as a team about how it came across to the viewer. Do you remember what it felt like after you called the Hail Mary
Hmm.
during COVID? Kyler Murray beats the Buffalo Bills. The Cardinals obviously just played the Bills this past weekend, because that is one of the great moments in Cardinals history. You were on the mic for it for CBS. Do you remember what you said after the broadcast and what you thought after the broadcast?
Dave, what's so crazy about that particular moment, the things that flood back to me have nothing to do with the play. They have everything to do with that weekend and how our whole broadcast setup went off course. Our producer, our AD, and our graphics coordinator all tested positive for COVID. None of them worked the game. So they got to Arizona. It was there that you had to take a test, and you had to pass the test in order to then go to the stadium. The three of them did not pass, or one failed, and then the other two got sucked in because they were close contacts. So none of them worked the game. Our producer for the game was in New Jersey at a remote location and doesn't do the NFL, does college football. Our director was by himself in the truck. And for the final 3 minutes of the broadcast, we lost all communication with producer and director. So we were flying blind. Charles and I could hear each other. We had zero cues or direction from the truck. So those are the things that come flooding back to me that no one would ever know about or ask about or be concerned with, because they shouldn't be. If you're at home, you don't care. Now throw into the mix, as you know, because you lived it, it's not a full house. It was a sparse crowd. Arizona was one of the places that did have some fans, but very limited. And that whole season, I had never realized how much I relied on crowd until that year of the NFL. And little cues. And it was very early in that year. We had Baltimore, Cleveland in the first game of the season. And I was late to something, but I got there in time on a Lamar Jackson pitch to Mark Ingram. And I thought to myself, wow, the audience doesn't realize how gifted I am to have recovered in that moment. And then they run the replay, and I completely missed a Lamar Jackson juke move because I was caught up in something else. And I realized that in normal broadcasting moments, the crowd would have been my compass, because the crowd would have reacted to the Jackson move. Even if I missed it, I may have changed my inflection, or I might have accelerated my play-by-play or pushed the gas pedal a bit to at least acknowledge that something special just happened. I whiffed. And that whole season was so bizarre. So that play, Buffalo had just scored a touchdown, and I thought I actually had a really good call on the Allen to Diggs touchdown to put the Bills in front. And I thought to myself, all right, considering there's no crowd here, considering Buffalo's run, because they were the hottest team in football, if I remember correctly, going into that game, I'm happy with how we handled all that. And now Arizona comes down the field, and you've had, and you called this one in particular, and your call was outstanding. More often than not, it doesn't work. I can't tell you how many Hail Marys I've called that the ball hits the turf and bodies fly, and sometimes it's close, and sometimes someone wedges in and tries to get their hands under it. More often than not, it doesn't work. This one happened to hit, and the synapses are firing in your brain. Make sure, are you telling the story? Do you get the receiver correct? Are you on top of it in the moment? Do you describe it in the way that is going to be the conduit for the fans at home to feel the energy, despite the fact there aren't 65,000 people in attendance? So you're trying to check so many boxes. It was an incredible moment. And obviously for Kyler Murray, it showed off all his skills on one play. One play exhibited all that young man is capable of. And yeah, it's going to be one of the great highlights of my professional career, because it's such a unique ending. You just don't get many of those like that.
I don't know how many Cardinal games you've done since. It seems like now there are more opportunities because CBS is doing
Yeah.
NFC versus NFC, and Fox is doing some AFC versus AFC. I assume you've done a few since. I'm pretty sure you and Charles have. When you've watched Kyler and you see that, what stands out to you about the potential? Like this past weekend, we see this great first half, and then we're watching the tape on the flight back. And really, even though his numbers didn't show it, he's just as good in the second half. There just were some drops, and obviously they lose the game. But what stands out to you the most when you watch Kyler? Because you've seen them all the last 30 plus years being around the NFL.
He's really an extraordinary talent. And obviously, that's part of the reason why the Cardinals decided to take the next step and pay him and anoint him as their franchise quarterback. These are marriages in the NFL that you can only judge after the fact. You can have opinions going into it. It's hard to find QB number one that is going to be the leader of your team and the leader in your locker room and the face of your franchise for an extended period of time. It's not easy. You can draft guys number one, number three, number 12, sixth round, whatever it may be. At some point, you have to make the decision as an organization. Are we investing in this player? Do we believe in him? And if we're not, what's the other option? What's the game plan? So I did have San Francisco, Arizona last year, where the Cardinals were competitive against a team that nearly won the Super Bowl. And it was a fun game. Actually ended up having some explosive plays and some good moments. And any time that I've called a game with Kyler Murray as a play-by-play announcer, I have to really be on my P's and Q's because there's a chance he's going to do something electric. And that's on every snap. There's the possibility he's going to do something that you haven't seen before or unlikely or not normal compared to what that play would usually present in the NFL. The key now is, can he string it together and be a consistent winner in this league? I got really good vibes last year talking to Jonathan Gannon, talking to the coaching staff, talking to the players. Despite winning 4 games, normally that's looked at as a lost season. I thought last year was a good development year. And certainly with Gannon, you understood, hey, he's really smart. He's really on top of things. And now you need a few things to fall into place. You need Harrison to become a legitimate number one go-to receiver. You need this offensive line to form some chemistry. And there's a bunch of playmakers on defense. It needs to come all together. The NFL, to me, of all the sports that I've called, is still the most unpredictable year to year. There are certain teams that, Kansas City now has taken on that role as the franchise in the league. And after that, there are teams that you believe in. And then there's a layer in the NFL that you don't quite have a handle on year to year, based on strength of schedule, based on injuries, based on a draft class just coming out and performing at a high level, or a couple of free agent signings that really hit. You can go worst to first in the NFL, more so than in any other sport. That is proven. There's data that shows it, and there's a reason why. The margin of error in the NFL is set up in a way, if you lose your guy, the starting quarterback, most teams cannot withstand it. If you're healthy, if you're deep, you've got a chance to do damage in this league. And Arizona is one of those teams that I'm still keeping an eye on, that it's going to be interesting to see if they take that next step, because they're certainly capable of it.
I want to go back. We'll get you out of here. I want to go back to what you said about when you're calling a game with a player like Kyler Murray.
Yep.
Because it's the same for me. Like, I'm on high alert. Like every call,
Yep.
when you call a game, sometimes it does depend on not your level of excitement, but just where your brain goes in terms of like being ready for something
100%.
that is unpredictable. It's like when you're calling a Steph Curry game or a LeBron game, right? In the NBA, just you might see something that you'll never see again. And Kyler kind of falls into that category of the spectacular, where you got to be ready. And your brain, I just know I'm crouching right now as I'm talking to you, because that's kind of how I am. Jim Almohandro, the producer who stands behind me, can attest. Like, I'm ready almost every call because I don't know what he's going to do. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's such a perfect way to describe it, because you do have to be in the ready position mentally and almost physically. In a way, your body has to be open to the idea that something that you've never seen before might happen in front of you. I've never thought of it this way, but you just jarred a thought in my brain. I started calling NBA before I started calling NFL. And looking back on it, it probably helped me. The NBA style of play was so fast and the rhythm of it was so fast. And I didn't realize this until probably year 4 or 5 of calling NBA, when then I started calling NFL. But the thing about the NBA, you could have the play of the year take place at the 11:08 mark of the first quarter of a game on November the 8th. And if you're not ready for it, it'll pass you by. And nobody that hears the highlight later looks at the circumstances surrounding it. And they don't want to hear the story that you were looking down at your notes because it was only 52 seconds into the game and you wanted to get that stat out. They just want to know why you didn't nail the call. So the term you used was being on high alert. That's how I feel every NBA game that I do. I am ready for what might be the play of the year, not just the team's play of the year, the play of the year in the NBA. That's how athletic these guys are. That's how gifted they are. And at any moment, something can take place that can just blow your mind. So I carried that a bit into my NFL approach, not right away, but eventually I got there, that you better be ready. And now certain players force you to be in that mode. Lamar Jackson would be another one. Michael Vick, when he played in the NFL, certainly fit in that category. There were just certain guys, Barry Sanders, that's how old I am, calling games with him when I started doing the NFL. If you're not ready, you'll get swallowed up by the moment. And you don't get a take two. You don't get a backspace key. You get one shot. You get one take. And I've constantly reminded myself of that. And it's funny, I'm sure this has happened with you when the Cardinals might post a flashback moment from early in your career on X. And you're like, all right, I'll hit play. Why not? And it'll take you back to that moment, what you were thinking, what was going on in your life early in your broadcast career with the Cardinals, or if Syracuse posts something from 99 and 2000 and you're thinking, man, they let me on the air with that? Really? But I'm most proud when I see that on flashbacks by the NFL or CBS or the NBA or the Nets. I'm most proud that I was in the moment and I wasn't hovering above the moment as I was calling play by play. That's how you really have to view this job. You've got to be in it. The fans are in it. They are hanging on every moment. They are hanging on every word. And if you're taking plays off mentally, then you're doing an injustice to the team that you work with and to the audience. So for me, it's a constant state of what you just described, and you put it perfectly. It really is just being on high alert.
With football, there is a different level of preparation than there is
Yeah.
for basketball. It's different if you're doing a national game too, as opposed to the same team every week. But I've worked with a number of people on college football that are either former coaches or former players that are getting into the business. And I think when they were playing or coaching, they didn't realize the prep work that goes
Yeah.
into calling a game. So for people that are listening or watching that want to know, because I get asked this a lot, what's it like a week in the life of Ian Eagle getting ready to call an NFL game? Kind of take us through that, because there are some weeks where you're doing a Westwood One game on a
Yes.
Thursday, right? Along with your Sunday duties. You might have a Nets game. You might have an NBA game. Am I missing anything with you that you might have? But what's it
Well,
like?
it's very similar to your schedule. And I know we've had these discussions off the air in regards to compartmentalization and juggling and getting ahead and trying to take some of the pressure off, because once the game starts, everything crystallizes. And I'll put the work in. I've never been shy about putting the hours in necessary to get myself prepared for an event. And we're all different, and different things stick with us. Different things are important. We prioritize differently. We view information in different ways based on the lens that we use. Something that you find interesting, I may not find interesting. And something that I think has to make air, you might say, no, this is not relevant to what we're doing. That's what makes the world go round. But the one part that is consistent for anyone that is really good at this job is you're showing up ready to go because you've done the necessary work leading up to it. Those that are cramming, those that are trying to jot down things at the last moment or the night before, it's going to show up on the air. And it may not show up in that game, but it's going to show up on a broadcast later on because maybe you got away with it. You cut a corner here, or you took a shortcut there, and nobody realized that the next game that you did, you didn't really have all the info. But guess what? A week later, a month later, 6 months later, a year later, 5 years, at some point, that will cost you. So how I've always viewed it is I would rather be overprepared and use 10% than be underprepared and use 85% of my stuff. The part that took a while is getting to the place of not having to prove to the audience how much I know. And I think that's a very personal thing for every broadcaster. Some broadcasters never get there. They just feel as if I'm going to have a deluge of information. And if you like it, great. If you don't, no skin off my back. I just provided it for you. And I don't know what stage it was. I probably could narrow it down. I figured out, hey, look, whatever you're doing, it's for you. You've got to do it for the audience. That's the priority. This is not a me thing. And with all of the information that I was gathering throughout the week, I was tossing it in at random moments, and it made no sense as I started watching my tapes back. One thing that I started doing, Dave, that I had not done, which was a huge key for me, where I think I made a real serious turn as a broadcaster in the right direction. I started watching back games from a year earlier or 2 years earlier, not the ones that were fresh on my mind, where I remembered exactly why I said something or what my reaction was to a shot or what the graphic was. I started watching my stuff back from a year or two earlier when I had no recollection of what was the lead story, who were the key players, what was at stake. And then I could make a really serious evaluation on how I was covering a game. And I found myself improving leaps and bounds. It was a big step for me where I made market improvement based on my own personal feedback of seeing where I needed to get better. And that was a big jumping off point for me. That was probably, somewhere in the early 2000s where I finally figured it out. And that's after being on network television for 4, 5, 6 years. And it's still something I'll employ today. Just occasionally a random game. I know nothing about it from 2 years earlier, 3 years earlier, and just watch it back. And I learned more from that than I would watching my game from week one, New England and Cincinnati this season.
That's great. It's a great idea. I may need to incorporate that into my self-evaluation and self-scouting. And like you, I mean, this is year 21 on college football,
Mm,
18 on NBA for ESPN. And I think it took me 4, 5, 6 years to realize you're not calling the game for yourself. You're
yep.
not calling it for your bosses. You're not trying to call it to try to move up the ladder or impress
Yep.
somebody. You're calling it for the audience. And I think some people assume, oh, day one, that's your mindset. But I learned how to be a better listener to my analyst. At first you're kind of doing your game, the analyst is
Yep.
doing his or her game, and it takes time. Forgive me because I've kept you much longer than I promised I'd keep you. But the last one that I wanted to ask you, because I can't have you on and not ask you, now that you're the voice of the Final Four, and I think in my lifetime, you're the fourth, Gary Bender,
Mm.
Brent Hartsberger, and Jim Nance. I don't recall who was prior to Bender.
Dick Enberg.
Okay. And I think at that point, I was probably too young to remember much about those games. I think the first one I remember is Bender maybe in 81 or 82.
Mm, right.
But
I
you
was 79. That's the first one I legitimately remember watching, which happened to be Magic versus Bird. I remember storylines surrounding the previous one. My longtime broadcast partner, Jim Spinarkle, was in the national championship Duke against Kentucky in 78, the year before, when Goose Givens went off and had a brilliant game that led Kentucky to the title. And I remember the broadcast a bit, but 79 is really the one that I remember.
So you get the job, you're in that chair now. You've worked with Bill Raftery for a long time, so there's the
Yes.
relationship there. Grant Hill, you've worked with now for a number of years,
Yes.
NBA and college. But were you nervous? You knew the shoes that you were stepping into. You knew that whatever happens, it's going to be written about and talked about.
Yep.
And you don't need me to tell you you were fantastic, which
Oh,
I don't
thanks.
think anybody that has watched you over the years and knows you, nobody was surprised by. Were you
Thanks.
nervous? Did you think at all about how people are going to perceive this? Or did you really try to just call the game as you would any other game, which I know is easy to say, but we all, when we
Yep.
get really big games, we know the difference. Now, the audience hopefully doesn't know the difference because we're calling it the same way. But sometimes in our brains, when it's maybe a little bit bigger game,
Yep.
things are different internally. So, what were you feeling going into it? How did you feel after you were done calling your first national championship game?
Yeah, it's a great question and a legitimate one, and one that I would be curious about with other broadcasters when they got to that place where everything that led up to it is now happening for them. I had two very key thoughts in my mind prior to the entire weekend, which was in Arizona, in Glendale. So I'll have that memory for the rest of my life. The first one was very close to what you just detailed, which was, hey, it's a basketball game. You've done literally thousands of these. Don't change what you do. Don't try to be something else. Don't try to now raise the gravitas because it's the Final Four or it's the national championship. So that was the first part. The second part was very conscious. And it was a reminder prior to the weekend to enjoy it, to not let it become bigger than it was, and to find a sense of peace just as we were going on the air, which I did. So the national semifinals, the way things are set up at the Final Four, it's an elevated court because you're in stadiums, you're not in arenas. And your broadcast location is a little lower than it would normally be. You're looking up a bit at the action. So that's odd and different. And you could either, as a broadcaster, allow that to freak you out, or you take on the mentality of, hey, roll with the punches, whatever it is, it is. I chose B, which was I'll adjust, we'll make it work. Nobody needs to hear about my problems. But the strange part for me was going up those stairs to this raised, elevated court puts you away from everybody on the periphery. So normally, as you know, you do a game in an arena, you turn around to do your stand up and look into the camera. There are fans right behind or media members just behind that camera. Literally, they're feet away from you. So you're a little bit like an animal in a cage, or at least it feels that way. And people are staring now at you. But because this was so far away from any fans, any media members, any of my bosses, everybody just seemed such a lengthy distance away. I got to a very Zen-like place for this open, and it didn't strike me that this is the biggest event of my life or the most important broadcast. I just really went in with the attitude of have fun, and the audience is going to have fun too. And I did carry that with me for that entire weekend. I want to remind myself of that moving forward because that's really the way to do this. It's not a simple process to get there, but for whatever reason, and I'm really glad that I did that particular weekend, I just went with the mentality of just go with it. Just go with it, man, whatever it is. And even the practice day, and you've been there in other roles in your life, whether it was doing radio, whatever it might be, that day can be overwhelming if you allow it to be. And I just took the other viewpoint, which was, nope, anybody who wants to come up to you to talk, great, engage, chat, take pictures, whatever it may be. And that is really what happened. It was a carnival on the Friday before the Final Four. And if I didn't have the right attitude, I could have gotten very much frustrated by the fact that I wasn't doing what I normally do. I wasn't following my routine. I just went the opposite. I said, nope, this is a new experience. Just be open to all of it. And it really did help me over the course of the weekend.
Well, you were fantastic. You are fantastic. I remember reading all the articles and watched and listened to a lot of the interviews and podcasts you did. They were all great. And it's so true what Mike Breen said. Mike Breen, the longtime voice of the NBA. You'll never meet anybody who doesn't love Ian Eagle. And what was so funny about Breen's interview was him trying to just bust your balls by coming up with stuff like he colors his hair, just whatever, which isn't true, I guess, right? You
Not
said
true. Not
so.
true.
I wish I could color my hair. When you met me, I had a full head of hair, which most
You
people don't.
did, Matt. You had full lettuce. Like I don't know. I know there are some pictures circulating. Really nice head of hair, truly.
But Breen trying to come up with things to rip you about
Yes,
just because there aren't any. It's so true. You're the best, and I really appreciate the time because I know your schedule is busy. Thanks, Ian.
Dave. The feelings mutual. Truly, you're a great friend. You're such a talented broadcaster, and more than anything else, you're a terrific guy. So yes, I could have been watching the Kelly Clarkson show. Instead, I did your podcast. It's okay. I'll get by. I'll DVR it. We'll be fine. I'll be prepared.